was Sylamore Special playing their song This Old Barn. If you'd like to watch the full video and hear the full song, make sure you look for a link in the video description. I'm Matt Anderson. I own MillSounds Studio, and I'm lucky enough to be a guest on the AEA channel today to present you with their brand new active stereo N28 ribbon microphone. In terms of comparing this to the rest of the AEA lineup, this is similar in vein to their brand new N13 in that it's using smaller and shorter ribbon technology, but that's about where the comparisons end. It's actually a lot closer in terms of size and width and ribbon corrugation to AEA's KU4 ribbon microphone that's cardioid. Obviously this is figure 8, but that would be a good starting point in comparing the size of the ribbon. So this is really cool because it's shorter ribbon technology and a stereo array, and it's active. I know right off the bat I wanted to kind of hear how this sounded with something more familiar like the AEA R88 that I've used for years and absolutely love doing one mic things like I did with Sylamore Special that you just saw. AEA's voiced this to really work well in a stereo array. They went through like 6 different motor iterations to get this right in stereo, even down to the acoustic fabric choices, which made a difference on the low end when they're experimenting with different fabrics. At this point, I think a good starting point would be to compare this with the R88 because I think a lot of people are familiar with that microphone. So let's go ahead and start there and get to know the brand new N28. The stereo R88 microphone has kind of become a staple. You'll see it in studios all over the place. It's one of my favorite mics in the world. I'm very familiar with it. So the first thing I did when I got the N28 here is I put an R88 next to it in mono and then put one side of the N28 next to it and just listen to them back and forth in mono to kind of get a frame of reference with something that's familiar. This is the active version of the R88, so similar active transformer because when AEA does their active transformers, they're a little cleaner sounding. So this is going to give you a really good, accurate frame of reference. They're both going into the new generation of the AEA TRP 500 preamps, and they're flat. So let's go back and forth on these. They're about 2 feet apart, and I positioned them a little bit more towards the neck, looking at the body. I think for the song I'm going to record with the N28, I'm going to end up using my fingers to kind of strum on the guitar just to get a more mellow kind of sound for this song that I think is appropriate. I'll throw some pick in here for the demos just so you can hear both, but let's listen to both of them about 2 feet back. Sometimes I like hearing one chord over and over again when I'm auditioning a mic. Helpful to go back and forth with one very familiar thing. So I think I'm going to use my fingers to kind of strum lightly on the guitar for the song I'm going to do with the N28, but I'm going to throw a pick in there just so we'll have another brighter frame of reference. You'll hear that my live room's pretty open sounding. That's by design. I've kind of worked in a lot of really large sounding rooms over my career, so that's what I like. Generally, when I'm placing ribbon mics further back like this, I'll get a couple of my GIK gobos, and once I've got the mics positioned, I'll move those in behind them just to kind of tame the room sound if I want that. But it's really hard to get camera angles when you start shoving things right in front of the mics, so we'll leave them out for now. But let's go ahead and we'll move the mics a bit closer and hear them a little bit closer in. I've moved both the mics in a bit. I'd say we're floating around 20 inches or so. I probably moved in 5 or 6 inches. This kind of placement is what I would consider midfield, which is kind of how AEA is marketing the N28. It's a midfield stereo mic. Now, this is not just two N13s thrown into a stereo array. There are differences, but I would consider this about mid-range. I think one of the challenges when you're trying to voice ribbon mics at different ranges is obviously trying to figure out how much proximity effect you want to voice into the mic. Now you've got extremes in the AEA lineup, like the N22 that's made to be shoved in really close when maybe you're in a bedroom environment or something with not great acoustics. Really tame proximity effect on the N22. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got like the R88 where you can put that like 4 feet back and still get like more than enough low end that you need. So I have found with the N28 that sometimes when I'm close miking it on acoustic instruments, there's probably still a little bit too much low end than what I would want, but I think that was the right choice in this case, because just because it might sound like a little too much low end on an acoustic instrument might sound perfect on drums when you've only got it like 4 or 5 feet back, which I've used this as a room mic, and I think they've found a good middle ground in voicing it correctly as a mid-range ribbon. So one of the things you can do when you've got like the newer TRP 500 preamps from AEA is that you've got high-pass filter options on it. The TRP 500 preamp has a 230 hertz high-pass filter, which might sound a little extreme, but don't let that scare you off. I've found that 230 hertz filter is your friend when it comes to doing acoustic instruments. So take a listen to that. I've got both of these mics going into the TRP 500s with the 230 hertz high pass filter engaged on both mics. Let's hear a pick. Again, don't let that 230 hertz high pass filter scare you off. Even if you have another preamp, don't be afraid to get a little more severe. But I really like that 230 hertz high pass filter on the TRP 500. It is voiced perfectly for AEA's mics. I think the last thing I want to do is we will place them both in stereo next, and they will be in different locations. I think the N28 is going to be a little bit closer, and we'll have it in stereo, and we'll move the AEA R88 back a little further. Run them both through the TRPs and stereo and listen to them, and I think what their respective best placement scenarios would be. The N28 a little bit closer in with maybe the high pass filter engaged, and then the R88 a little further back with no high pass filter, so you can hear them back to back in like their perfect positions. Now both mics are running in stereo. I've got them both going through TRP preamps. The N28 I have positioned a little closer in. It's about 20 inches away. It's got the 230 hertz high pass filter engaged because I just felt like that was the sweet spot for it in terms of placement and getting a good high end response as well, which it is a little bit brighter than the R88, but you kind of have to place it correctly on each instrument to bring that high end out. And in this case, engaging that 230 hertz high pass filter made it sound almost perfect. The R88 is also going through a TRP preamp. It's positioned probably about 2 feet back, 6 or 7 inches further back from the N28. Completely flat, no high pass filter or anything. This is where I felt like it sounded really good, and this is generally, I record this mic a lot with the R88, so this is where I always put it. Because my room is pretty live sounding and open sounding, I usually move in my GIK acoustic gobos behind it just to get rid of a little bit of the room tone, but I'm not going to do that in this case because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. But just listen to the room tone in this mic and realize that you can easily get rid of that with a gobo position behind it. Let's take a listen. If I can find my pick, we will listen to some picked strummed acoustic. That should give you a good frame of reference moving forward of where the N28 falls tonally. This is literally the first thing I did when I got this mic a few weeks ago. I put it up next to the R88 because it was familiar to me. It gave me a really good starting point to figure out how to use this effectively, how to position it, where it falls tonally. So I don't like injecting my opinion too much into these things. I try to do demos and just give you enough to where you can decide for yourself. But I'll just say that the low end and the high end both fall in different areas in both of these mics, and they both have their strong points in terms of how they pick up low end and how the high end responds. So don't think of this as which one's better. They're really different. And after using these for, a month or so at this point, it warrants having both of them. They sound very different. So let's go ahead and move forward and do some other stuff. I brought in singer-songwriter Craig Estes to perform one of his songs live in front of the N28. I've also positioned the R88 a little further back in where I usually place it in this type of scenario. The N28 is about 12 inches away. The R88 is about 2.5 feet away so that we can compare and contrast. If you'd like to hear the full song with the N28, I'll leave a link in the video description.
Some people say there's no such thing as love at first sight. I doubted the dismount and feared leaving the ground until I watched you take flight. And as I look into your eyes, there's no nature of disguise. Forever with you I'll be. It didn't take long to see we're just a couple of gypsies. A spring breeze blowing in the trees, like the light of the day. It takes the darkness of our pain away. We're just like two vampires, living life like it won't expire. Two autumn leaves blowing with the breeze. We're a couple of gypsies. Some people say that there's no way that our love is in the clear. And as we rise above the sea and the tops of the trees, we can see it much better up here. We were lost, but we found ourselves. I can't wait to share a lifetime of tales. We're just a couple of gypsies. A spring breeze blowing in the trees, like the light of the day. Takes the darkness of our pain away. And just like two vampires, living life like it won't expire.
One of the things I like to do when a company sends me a new mic like this to check out is record a whole song front to back using just the mic they send me. So I've done that. Let's go ahead and start with acoustic guitar and work our way through some other instrumentation. This next instrument is pretty unique. It's called a Griffin, and it's done by a company called AEA Guitars. It's basically more or less a 12-string guitar, but it's high-tuned up to a minor seventh, and it's got unison strings instead of octave strings like most guitars. I kind of describe it as a mandolin on steroids. So it'll give you a good, brighter instrument to hear the N28 on. I've gone ahead and recorded the vocals in MS, mid-side mode. I don't really have a specific artistic reason for doing it that way, but I just figured I'd give you something else to play around with. Both channels are going through the AEA TRP 500 preamp with the lower 115 Hz high pass just to help with potential plosives when you close mic vocals with a ribbon mic. I might end up putting up my vocal kind of booth around this at the end for the final session files. We'll see. I'm not sure yet, but can't promise you I'm going to hit these falsettos. Here we go. We've all heard gunshots on the news before. Heroes in hoodies are a psychopath, nothing more. Fame begat fame, the rich came from riches with the greed on display like it's a metaphor. We know it ain't easy now, but margins of paper thin. Hustle helps the meds go down, cancer makes the world go round. Bullets and benzos are in high demand. Why do we call it a murder of crows? It's what we should have called the billionaires and CEOs. The worst offenders come with those three-letter names: CIA and FBI, NRA and HMOs. Why don't we call them by name? Cast out this legion of demons we've made. Why don't we call them by name? Why don't we call them by name? Now I'm going to pull out the guitar amp. We're going to start with some basic electric guitar in stereo and then rotate the mic around so that we can record bass guitar as well, but do it in mono. Let's take a listen to those two. This last electric guitar example is a little unique. One of the things I like to do with stereo mics when I have a pretty good idea of how I'm going to pan things out in the arrangement is take the mic and actually rotate it so that we're still hearing a full stereo spread, but rather than panning it in post, we're using the stereo mic to pan it off to the side. Let's take a listen to this electric real quick. The piano miking in this example is pretty straightforward. I have an older, darker Kawaii grand piano, so this N28 should pair pretty well with it and help bring out a little bit more presence in the darker tone. I brought out the really big drum shells for this song. I've got an old 30-inch Slingerland kick as well as a Sugar Percussion 15-inch by 7-inch cedar snare. I find it a little harder to one mic drums with a stereo mic. It's a little easier with a mono mic because you don't have to worry about, your snare being off to one side and your kick being off to one side. So tinkered a little bit, actually added a shaker on top of the kick to give it a little bit of a shaker sound as opposed to overdubbing that later. Let's take a listen. That pretty much does it for the instrumentation on this song. I figured since I'm reviewing the N28, a stereo ribbon mic, if I were doing this for a client using just the N28, this is the type of production approach I'd take with the song anyway. Keep it really simple and sparse, let everything have space, let the song breathe, let the mic shine through and not the production. So speaking of, now we're going to hear the full song front to back. You're going to hear a basic mix that I've done on the song, but whenever I get to this stage on these reviews, I try not to overmix things. I want you to really hear the mic as opposed to my choices. And if any of you out there are mixers, you know, we can get pretty severe sometimes when we overmix things. So again, some really basic just EQ, basic compression, some fun stuff on the master bus. I've also run the full song through my Atari tape machine because, you know, why not? It seemed appropriate for this type of song. So let's go ahead and take a listen to the song. One other thing, don't forget that I'm going to have full session files available for you. Those will probably be in the video description. Make sure you download all of those. If you're a Pro Tools user, it's a Pro Tools session, so you can open it up and everything's really well organized. If you don't use Pro Tools, just go into the audio folder, drag those files out into any DAW you want. I bounce things from the top of the grid, so you should be able to bring everything in, and it should be pretty simple. So thanks for checking out the N28. I'm going to leave you with the song.
We've all heard gunshots on the news before. Heroes and hoodies are a psychopath, nothing more. Fame begat fame, rich came from riches, with the greed on display like it's a metaphor. No, it ain't easy now, but margins are paper thin. Hustle, hustle, let's go down. Cancer makes the world go round. Bullets and benzos are in high demand. Why do we call it a herd of crows? It's what we should have called the billionaires and CEOs. The worst offenders come, those three-letter names: CIA and FBI, NRA and HMOs. Why don't we call them by name? Cast out this legion of demons we've made. Why don't we call them by name? Why don't we call them by name? Three-letter names send a good man a letter saying, don't fight the power, your end is approaching. There is but one way out for you, boy. Those three-letter names are writing sentient programs saying nobody's dying on the deathbed. Death had a pension fund, we'd all chip in. Might sound crazy, and I know this ain't easy, but looking in from the outside, it always takes guns on some gasoline to make a change. Why do we call it a herd of crows? It's what we should have called the billionaires and the CEOs. The worst offenders come with those three-letter names: CIA and FBI, NRA Why don't